In textbooks, federalism appears orderly and predictable. Powers are neatly divided, responsibilities clearly assigned, and institutions seem to function within well-defined boundaries. This presentation creates an impression of balance and stability, as if federalism operates through fixed rules rather than ongoing negotiation. In practice, however, federalism unfolds in a dynamic political environment. Social demands, economic disparities, electoral incentives, and administrative constraints constantly test these neat divisions. What looks stable on paper often becomes fluid when confronted with real governance challenges. Federalism is not merely a constitutional arrangement, but a living political relationship. It is shaped by how the center and states interpret authority, respond to crises, and negotiate priorities. These interactions evolve over time, reflecting changing power equations and political contexts. The complexity arises because federalism must balance unity with diversity. National objectives coexist with regional aspirations, often creating tensions that cannot be resolved by legal provisions alone. Political judgment, cooperation, and compromise become as important as formal rules. Unlike static textbook models, real federalism operates through everyday decisions. Fiscal negotiations, administrative coordination, and policy implementation reveal how authority is shared, contested, or adjusted. These processes expose the limits of purely textual understanding. Therefore, to understand federalism meaningfully, one must move beyond constitutional descriptions. Federalism is experienced through practice, shaped by political behavior and institutional interaction, making it less a fixed structure and more a continuously evolving relationship. The Constitution begins by defining India as a union of states. Under Article 1, this opening provision establishes the basic political form of the Indian Republic. What the Indian Republic? It signals that the Indian Federation is a single constitutional entity composed of states, rather than a loose association of autonomous units. The use of the term union instead of federation was a conscious constitutional choice. It conveyed the idea that the Indian polity was not formed through a compact among pre-existing sovereign states. Instead, states derive their authority and existence from the Constitution itself. Article 1 also reflects the framers' intention that the territorial and political unity of India should remain intact. The Constitution does not recognize a right of secession. The Union is conceived as indestructible, while the states are subject to constitutional reorganization within the Union framework. This conception shaped the overall design of center-state relations. The Constitution grants significant powers to the Union, particularly in matters considered vital for national integrity, security, and economic coordination. The federal structure thus incorporates a strong central authority from the outset. The historical context heavily influenced this design. Independence was accompanied by partition, communal violence, and political uncertainty. The framers viewed national consolidation as an urgent priority, requiring a center capable of decisive action across the entire territory of India. Constituent Assembly debates reveal that federalism was accepted as necessary, but not without reservations. Several members expressed concern that excessive provincial autonomy could weaken unity or revive centrifugal tendencies, especially in a socially and linguistically diverse society. At the same time, the Assembly recognized the administrative and cultural importance of states. Federalism was seen as a practical necessity for governing a vast country. However, this federalism was framed within a constitutional structure that placed ultimate authority with the Union. The strong center was also intended to ensure uniformity in governance where required. Common citizenship, integrated services, and coordinated economic planning were viewed as essential for nation building. Central authority was thus embedded not as an exception, but as a structural feature. Taken together, Article 1 and related constitutional choices establish India as the Union-first federation. This foundational idea sets the constitutional backdrop against which center-state relations operate, shaping the balance between unity and regional governance without yet entering the realm of constitutional practice. The distribution of legislative powers in Indian federalism is designed to balance national unity with regional autonomy. The Constitution divides subjects of legislation between the Union and the states through 3 lists, forming the core framework for lawmaking authority. The Union list contains subjects of national importance that require uniformity across the country. Parliament has exclusive power to legislate on these matters, reflecting the need for central control in areas affecting sovereignty, security, and nationwide coordination. The state list includes subjects primarily connected to regional and local governance. State legislatures are empowered to make laws on these matters, recognizing that states are better placed to address local needs, administrative diversity, and region-specific concerns. Between these 2 lies the concurrent list, which allows both Parliament and state legislatures to make laws on the same subject. This arrangement reflects areas where national standards are desirable but state-level variation may still be necessary. The concurrent list inevitably creates zones of overlap. When both levels legislate on the same subject, the Constitution provides that Union law prevails in case of conflict, unless specific constitutional conditions allow state law to operate. This overlapping authority illustrates the cooperative yet hierarchical nature of Indian federalism. It permits shared responsibility while preserving the primacy of the Union in resolving legislative inconsistencies that may affect national coherence. Beyond the 3 lists, residuary powers play a crucial role. Article 248 assigns the authority to legislate on subjects not enumerated in any list exclusively to Parliament. This provision strengthens the Union's position within the federal structure. The allocation of residuary powers to the center distinguishes India from classical federations, where such powers often rest with states. In India, this choice reflects a preference for flexibility and central initiative in addressing new and emerging issues. Overall, the distribution of legislative powers reveals a constitutionally structured but centrally weighted federal system. While states enjoy defined legislative space, the design ensures that Parliament retains decisive authority in maintaining uniformity and responding to evolving governance needs. Financial federalism in the Constitution seeks to align expenditure responsibilities with revenue capacities across different levels of government. It recognizes that while states perform many public functions, their independent fiscal capacity remains limited. Articles 268 to 281 provide the constitutional framework for this arrangement. These provisions define how taxation powers, revenue sharing, and grants and aid are structured to support coordinated functioning between the Union and the states. Certain taxes are levied by the Union but collected and appropriated by states, while others are levied and collected by the Union and shared. This layered design reflects an attempt to combine administrative efficiency with fiscal decentralization. The Constitution also establishes the Finance Commission as a periodic institutional mechanism. Its role is to recommend principles governing the distribution of financial resources between the Union and the states. Vertical devolution refers to the sharing of resources between the Union and all states collectively. It addresses the imbalance between the center's revenue-raising capacity and the state's expenditure responsibilities in delivering public services. Horizontal devolution concerns the distribution of resources among states. It takes into account differences in population, income levels, fiscal capacity, and development needs, aiming to ensure relative equity within the federal system. Grants and aid under Article 275 complement tax devolution. They are intended to support states with specific needs or structural disadvantages, reinforcing the idea that fiscal transfers are instruments of balanced national development. Together, these mechanisms reflect the intent to maintain fiscal balance without undermining political unity. The Constitution does not seek complete fiscal autonomy for states, but a coordinated sharing arrangement within a unified framework. Financial federalism thus operates as an enabling structure. It allows states to discharge their responsibilities while remaining integrated into a national fiscal system, ensuring continuity, predictability, and cooperative functioning across levels of government. The constitutional framework provides the formal structure of center-state relations, but it does not determine how this structure operates in practice. Written provisions define powers and procedures, yet their actual functioning depends on political actors and institutional behavior. Federal relations unfold within a political environment shaped by competition, cooperation, and negotiation. The Constitution sets boundaries, but it cannot anticipate the full range of political situations that emerge in a dynamic democracy. Elections play a central role in shaping federal behavior. Electoral incentives influence how governments assert authority, seek resources, or accommodate demands from other levels of government. Political priorities often vary depending on electoral cycles and mandates. The party system further mediates center-state interactions. When the same political party governs at both levels, coordination tends to be smoother. When different parties are in power, relations may become more assertive, negotiated, or adversarial. Federal behavior is also shaped by the need for political legitimacy. Governments seek to demonstrate effectiveness to their constituencies, which can affect how they engage with the other level. This pursuit of legitimacy often shapes bargaining strategies. Coalition politics adds another layer of complexity. Regional parties may influence national decision-making, while central leadership may rely on state-level support. These arrangements reshape power equations beyond constitutional text. Administrative discretion and political leadership further condition outcomes. The use of authority depends not only on legal powers, but on how leaders choose to exercise restraint or assertiveness within those powers. Thus, center-state relations are continuously redefined through political processes. The Constitution provides the foundation, but politics supplies the motion. Understanding federalism therefore requires attention to electoral dynamics, party alignments, and political context alongside constitutional design. Cooperative federalism refers to a mode of center-state relations based on collaboration, rather than strict division of authority. It assumes that shared goals and interdependence require governments at different levels to work together within the constitutional framework. In practice, cooperative federalism gained prominence as governance challenges became more complex and interlinked. Economic management, social development, and infrastructure planning increasingly required coordination, consultation, and joint decision-making rather than unilateral action. The decline of the Planning Commission marked a significant shift in this approach. Centralized planning gave way to mechanisms emphasizing partnership with states, recognizing their role as active participants rather than mere implementing units of national priorities. This transition led to the establishment of the Niti Aayog. It was conceived as a platform to promote cooperative federalism through structured dialogue, shared policy inputs, and greater involvement of states in national development strategies. Unlike its predecessor, Niti Aayog does not allocate funds directly. Its role is primarily advisory and coordinative, aiming to foster consensus and policy alignment while respecting the diverse developmental contexts of different states. A prominent institutional expression of cooperative federalism is the GST Council, established under Article 279 IA. It brings together the Union and states to jointly decide on indirect tax structures and rates. The GST Council institutionalizes consultation as a constitutional requirement. Decisions are taken collectively, reflecting an understanding that fiscal harmonization requires mutual agreement and continuous negotiation among multiple governments. Through such institutions, cooperative federalism operates as a process rather than a fixed arrangement. It relies on dialogue, trust, and shared responsibility, demonstrating how constitutional design adapts to evolving governance needs without altering formal federal structures. While cooperative federalism emphasizes partnership, its functioning is shaped by underlying power asymmetries. The Union's greater fiscal capacity and legislative reach place it in a structurally stronger position during negotiations with states, affecting the balance of cooperation. This asymmetry becomes visible in fiscal arrangements. States depend significantly on transfers from the center, limiting their bargaining strength. Cooperation, therefore, often operates within constraints set by the Union's control over major revenue sources. Conditional transfers further complicate cooperative federalism. Financial assistance is frequently linked to compliance with centrally defined priorities or procedural requirements. While intended to ensure uniform outcomes, such conditions can reduce state-level policy flexibility. Compliance pressures also arise from administrative coordination mechanisms. States may formally participate in consultations, yet face limited room to diverge from agreed frameworks due to fiscal dependence or regulatory harmonization requirements. The operation of the GST Council illustrates these tensions. Although designed as a collective decision-making body, the Council functions within an environment where revenue risks and adjustment burdens are unevenly distributed. Disputes over GST compensation highlight this imbalance. States rely on assured compensation to offset revenue losses, while delays or uncertainties in compensation expose their fiscal vulnerability within a system framed as cooperative. Such disputes do not negate cooperation, but they reveal its limits. Negotiation occurs within predefined institutional and fiscal boundaries, where the Union retains greater capacity to absorb shocks and enforce policy continuity. Cooperative federalism also depends on political alignment and trust. When these weaken, institutional mechanisms alone may not prevent friction. Formal cooperation may persist, but substantive consensus becomes harder to sustain. Thus, cooperative federalism operates with inherent constraints. It facilitates dialogue and coordination, yet remains shaped by unequal capacities, fiscal dependence, and compliance expectations embedded within India's federal structure. Competitive federalism refers to the use of comparison and performance-based evaluation among states to improve governance outcomes. It treats states as units that compete to attract investment, improve service delivery, and demonstrate administrative efficiency within a common national framework. This approach is operationalized through rankings, indices, and benchmarking exercises. States are assessed on predefined indicators, and their relative positions are publicly displayed. The underlying assumption is that transparency and comparison create incentives for reform and innovation. Rankings convert governance outcomes into measurable scores. By standardizing indicators, they allow comparison across states with diverse contexts. This method seeks to promote best practices by highlighting successful models that others may emulate. From a governance perspective, competitive federalism can encourage efficiency. States may streamline procedures, improve regulatory environments, and strengthen implementation capacity to improve their rankings. Competition thus becomes a tool for administrative motivation rather than coercion. What? However, competition also raises concerns about federal equity. States do not begin from equal economic or institutional positions. Uniform benchmarking may advantage states with stronger initial capacity, while structurally weaker states struggle to compete on the same metrics. This can widen interstate disparities if rankings influence investment flows or policy attention. High-performing states may attract more resources, while lower-ranked states risk being perceived as persistently inefficient, reinforcing existing inequalities within the federal system. There is also a governance trade-off. The pursuit of better rankings may encourage short-term, measurable outcomes over long-term capacity building. Policy choices may prioritize indicators rather than context-specific developmental needs. Competitive federalism, therefore, interacts uneasily with the constitutional objective of balanced regional development. While it promotes efficiency and accountability, it may dilute the redistributive and supportive role traditionally associated with cooperative federalism. Within the GS Paper 2 framework, competitive federalism represents a shift in governance philosophy. It strengthens performance orientation, but its impact on federal equity depends on how competition is balanced with coordination, support, and contextual sensitivity. Fiscal federalism, in practice, extends beyond constitutional formulas and statutory recommendations. It is shaped by how revenue systems affect autonomy, predictability, and trust between the center and the states, particularly in shared tax regimes. The introduction of the goods and services tax marked a structural shift in India's fiscal federalism. By subsuming multiple state-level indirect taxes, GST significantly altered the revenue-raising autonomy of states within a harmonized national tax framework. Under GSTs, states surrendered independent taxation powers in exchange for a promise of stable revenues and collective decision-making. This trade-off placed greater emphasis on intergovernmental trust as a functional requirement of fiscal federalism. Revenue dependence has consequently increased. States rely more heavily on shared tax proceeds and transfers, reducing flexibility to respond independently to local fiscal pressures. This dependence intensifies the importance of timely and predictable transfers. The role of the GSC Council is central in this context. It institutionalizes joint decision-making, but operates within a framework where the Union's fiscal capacity provides greater resilience against revenue shocks. Compensation arrangements were designed to address transitional revenue losses faced by states. However, delays and uncertainties in compensation payments exposed vulnerabilities in the cooperative fiscal compact underpinning GST. These compensation-related conflicts revealed a growing trust deficit. While the framework remained formally intact, states expressed concern over fiscal stress and limited recourse when assured flows were disrupted. Such tensions highlight that fiscal federalism relies not only on legal mechanisms, but also on confidence in institutional commitments. When expectations regarding support and burden sharing are unsettled, cooperative arrangements face strain. Fiscal federalism, beyond formulas, therefore involves managing expectations, risks, and credibility. GS demonstrates how shared tax systems can deepen integration while simultaneously testing autonomy and trust within India's federal structure. Grants and borrowing powers form an important component of fiscal federalism, complementing tax devolution. While grants support states in meeting specific needs, borrowing enables them to finance capital expenditure and manage fiscal imbalances within constitutional limits. Article 293 governs the borrowing powers of states. It permits states to borrow within India, but subjects this power to restrictions when they are indebted to the Union or receive loans from it, creating a system of conditional autonomy. This arrangement reflects an intent to balance fiscal responsibility with flexibility. States retain borrowing authority, but the Union is empowered to impose conditions to safeguard overall macroeconomic stability and credit discipline. Over time, fiscal discipline has been reinforced through statutory frameworks such as the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Norms. These frameworks impose limits on deficits and debt, shaping state-level fiscal decision-making. FRBM constraints influence how states allocate resources. Borrowing ceilings restrict fiscal expansion, encouraging prioritization of expenditure. At the same time, they limit states' ability to respond freely to economic slowdowns or unforeseen expenditure pressures. Conditional borrowing permissions further affect policy space. States may be allowed additional borrowing subject to compliance with reform-linked conditions, tying fiscal flexibility to centrally determined performance benchmarks. Such conditions are presented as incentives for reform and efficiency. However, they also shift the balance of fiscal control towards the center, as access to borrowing becomes linked to approval and compliance rather than independent assessment. The combined effect of grants, borrowing rules, and fiscal discipline frameworks is a structured but constrained fiscal environment for states. Autonomy exists, but within clearly defined boundaries, shaped by national fiscal priorities. Thus, fiscal control mechanisms shape state policy space indirectly. They influence not only the volume of resources available, but also the timing, composition, and direction of state-level public expenditure within India's federal system. Administrative federalism concerns how executive authority is shared and exercised between the center and the states. While legislative and fiscal powers are constitutionally divided, administration often operates through integrated structures that link both levels of government. A central feature of this arrangement is the All India Services provided for under Article 312. These services create a common administrative cadre, recruited and trained by the Union, but deployed primarily in state administrations. The rationale behind All India Services lies in ensuring administrative uniformity, professional standards, and national integration. Officers are expected to uphold constitutional values while serving both national and state interests across diverse regions. However, this design produces dual control. While states exercise day-to-day supervisory authority over officers, the center retains significant influence over recruitment, service conditions, and career progression. This shared control creates structural ambiguity. Cadre management has therefore been a recurrent source of center-state tension. Disagreements arise over postings, deputations, disciplinary control, and repatriation of officers, reflecting differing administrative and political priorities. States often argue that excessive central influence undermines their executive autonomy. They view administrative control as essential for effective policy implementation and accountability to elected state governments. The center, on the other hand, emphasizes the national character of these services. Central oversight is seen as necessary to preserve neutrality, protect officers from local political pressures, and maintain administrative coherence across the Federation. Administrative federalism thus operates through negotiated practice rather than clear separation. Formal constitutional provisions coexist with informal conventions, political bargaining, and evolving norms of cooperation and contestation. In the UPSC context, administrative federalism illustrates how governance in India functions through shared authority. It highlights the limits of constitutional clarity when administrative integration and political accountability intersect within a federal system. The governor occupies a constitutionally significant position within India's federal structure. Articles 153 to 162 established the office defining the governor as the executive head of the state, appointed by the president and functioning within the constitutional framework. These provisions place the governor at the intersection of the union and the states. While formally part of the state executive, the governor also represents the constitutional link between the center and state governments. Most executive functions of the governor are exercised on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. This aligns the office with the principles of parliamentary democracy and responsible government at the state level. However, the Constitution also provides the governor with discretionary powers in specific situations. These include circumstances where constitutional machinery requires independent judgment rather than ministerial advice. Discretionary functions become relevant during government formation, especially when no party commands a clear majority. The governor's role in inviting a party or coalition to form the government has been a recurring source of constitutional debate. Another area of contention relates to assent to state legislation. The governor may give assent, withhold assent, or reserve a bill for the consideration of the president, introducing an additional constitutional checkpoint. Delays in granting assent have raised questions about the balance between constitutional oversight and executive obstruction. While the Constitution permits discretion, its scope and timing are not always clearly defined. These controversies highlight the dual character of the governor's office. It combines constitutional neutrality with discretionary authority, operating within a federal system that depends on restraint, convention, and institutional trust. Thus, the constitutional role of governors reflects the tension between autonomy and oversight. The office is designed as a stabilizing mechanism, but its practical functioning significantly influences center-state relations within Indian federalism. The use of central agencies raises important questions for federal trust within India's constitutional framework. Policing and public order are primarily stateless subjects, placing day-to-day law enforcement within the domain of state governments. Despite this allocation, the Constitution permits the Union to establish institutions that operate across state boundaries. Central agencies function within this space, addressing offenses that involve interstate dimensions, national interest, or specialized investigation requirements. This intersection creates an institutional overlap rather than a formal transfer of power. States retain primary responsibility for policing, while central agencies derive authority from union legislation and consent-based or judicially mandated mechanisms. The involvement of agencies, such as the Central Bureau of Investigation, illustrates this overlap. While not a constitutional body, its functioning depends on legal frameworks that recognize both union competence and state jurisdiction. Federal trust becomes relevant when consent and cooperation are required. The constitutional design assumes that institutions will operate with mutual respect for jurisdictional boundaries, preserving the spirit of cooperative governance. Concerns arise when investigative actions are perceived to bypass state authority. Such situations highlight the sensitivity of federal arrangements, where legality alone may not resolve tensions rooted in political and administrative trust. Similarly, financial and economic investigations conducted by agencies like the Enforcement Directorate in areas linked to union legislative powers. Their actions, however, often have direct implications for state-level political and administrative processes. From a constitutional perspective, these agencies represent instruments of national coordination rather than central domination. Their legitimacy depends on adherence to due process, transparency, and clearly defined institutional roles. Thus, the use of central agencies sits at the intersection of law, federalism, and trust. While constitutionally permissible, their impact on center-state relations depends on how institutional authority is exercised within the federal balance envisioned by the Constitution. Asymmetrical federalism refers to constitutional arrangements where different states enjoy different degrees of autonomy or special provisions. This approach recognizes that a uniform distribution of powers may not adequately address the diversity within a federal polity like India. The Indian Constitution incorporates asymmetry to accommodate historical, cultural, social, and geographical variation. Certain regions entered the Union under distinct circumstances, requiring tailored constitutional safeguards rather than identical treatment. The Article 371 series embody this approach in a general sense. They provide special provisions for particular states, addressing issues such as customary laws, administrative arrangements, development needs, or protection of local identity within the constitutional framework. These provisions do not create separate sovereignties. Instead, they operate within the union structure, allowing differentiated governance while preserving national unity and constitutional supremacy. Asymmetry thus functions as an adaptive mechanism rather than an exception to federalism. Uniform federalism is unsuitable for India due to its scale and heterogeneity. Linguistic diversity, uneven development, border sensitivities, and distinct social institutions require flexible governance arrangements that a one-size-fits-all model cannot effectively provide. Asymmetrical arrangements also help manage integration. By accommodating regional concerns constitutionally, the Union reduces the likelihood of alienation and conflict, reinforcing political stability through recognition rather than rigid centralization. At the same time, these provisions reflect pragmatic constitutionalism. The framers acknowledged that equality among states does not necessarily mean identical powers, but equitable treatment based on context and need. Asymmetrical federalism, therefore, represents a balance between unity and diversity. It allows the Constitution to respond to regional specificities without fragmenting authority, demonstrating how flexibility can strengthen rather than weaken a federal system. Federalism during crises reveals how constitutional arrangements respond under stress. Emergencies test the balance between national coordination and state autonomy, often requiring rapid decision-making that stretches ordinary federal conventions. Pandemic governance provides a clear illustration. A public health emergency demanded uniform responses across states, while conditions on the ground varied widely. This tension exposed the limits of routine center state functioning. The Disaster Management Act became a key instrument for national coordination. It enabled the Union to issue binding directions, creating a centralized framework for managing a crisis that transcended state boundaries. While constitutionally valid, this centralized approach altered federal dynamics. States responsible for health and local administration found their discretion constrained by nationwide guidelines and uniform protocols. Coordination challenges emerged from this arrangement. States differed in capacity, timing, and local needs, yet operated within a common regulatory framework. Adjusting central directives to regional context became an administrative challenge. Fiscal stress further complicated cooperation. Expenditure responsibilities increased sharply at the state level, while revenue flows were uncertain. This imbalance affected the ability of states to implement crisis responses effectively. At the same time, crisis governance demonstrated the necessity of interdependence. No single level of government could manage the pandemic independently, reinforcing the practical importance of collaborative federal action. Institutional trust played a critical role. Where communication and consultation were effective, coordination improved. Where trust weakened, compliance became more procedural than cooperative. Federalism during crises thus operates under exceptional pressures. Pandemic governance shows that while centralization may be necessary for coordination, its effectiveness depends on flexibility, trust, and responsiveness to state-level realities within the federal system. The judiciary plays a central role in maintaining the federal balance envisioned by the Constitution. It acts as the final interpreter of constitutional boundaries, resolving disputes between the center and the states through authoritative constitutional adjudication. The Supreme Court's jurisdiction over center-state disputes ensures that federal conflicts are addressed through legal principles rather than political escalation. This role reinforces constitutional supremacy over competing claims of authority. Through its interpretations, the Court has clarified that federalism is part of the Constitution's basic structure. This principle limits the extent to which either level of government can alter the federal balance through executive or legislative action. Judicial scrutiny has been particularly significant in matters involving central intervention in state affairs. The Court has articulated standards to assess the use of constitutional powers, emphasizing accountability, reasoned action, and constitutional morality. Judgments such as S.R. Bomai contributed to this jurisprudence by reinforcing the idea that federal provisions are not merely political tools, but are subject to legal limitations. The emphasis lies on principles of constitutional restraint and federal integrity. In recent years, the judiciary has continued to interpret federal provisions in contexts involving fiscal powers, administrative control, and institutional autonomy. These interpretations reflect an evolving understanding of federalism in a changing governance environment. The Court's approach often balances two concerns. It recognizes the need for a strong center to ensure national unity, while simultaneously safeguarding the functional autonomy of states within their constitutional sphere. Judicial federalism thus operates as a stabilizing force. It provides continuity and predictability to center-state relations by grounding federal disputes in constitutional reasoning rather than shifting political dynamics. Overall, the judiciary shapes federalism not by designing policy, but by enforcing constitutional principles. Its role lies in preserving equilibrium, ensuring that cooperation and contestation unfold within the constitutional framework of Indian federalism. Federalism and democracy are closely intertwined in the Indian constitutional framework. Federal arrangements create multiple centers of political power, ensuring that democratic participation is not confined to a single national authority. States function as representative units of India's social and cultural diversity. Linguistic, regional, and historical identities find political expression through state institutions, allowing democracy to reflect pluralism rather than impose uniformity. By providing elected governments closer to citizens, federalism deepens democratic engagement. State-level politics enables voters to influence governance on issues that directly affect their daily lives, strengthening the responsiveness of democratic institutions. Federalism also expands political choice. Different states may pursue varied policy priorities within the constitutional framework, offering citizens alternative models of governance while remaining part of a unified democratic system. This diversity of political choices enhances democratic competition. Parties and leaders are tested at multiple levels, preventing excessive concentration of power and encouraging accountability through comparison and electoral feedback. Accommodation is another democratic function of federalism. Regional aspirations and identity-based demands are channeled through constitutional structures rather than extra-constitutional means, reducing conflict and fostering political stability. Federal democracy also allows dissent to be institutionalized. States governed by different political formations can articulate alternative perspectives, contributing to deliberation and balance within the national political process. From a stability perspective, federalism distributes political risks. Democratic pressures are absorbed across levels of government, preventing systemic overload and enabling adaptive responses to social and economic change. Within the GS Paper 2 framework, federalism emerges as more than a structural arrangement. It is a democratic mechanism that manages diversity, enhances participation, and sustains political legitimacy in a large and heterogeneous polity. Contemporary Indian federalism operates within a context of evolving political, economic, and social pressures. These pressures have exposed fault lines that challenge the balance between unity and autonomy envisioned in the constitutional framework. Why? Debates on centralization have intensified in recent years. Expanded use of central legislation, regulatory frameworks, and national policy directives has raised questions about the shrinking operational space available to states. Fiscal stress constitutes another major fault line. States face rising expenditure responsibilities alongside constrained revenue autonomy, increasing dependence on transfers and shared taxes to sustain governance functions. Uncertainty in fiscal flows affects planning and service delivery diktat. When predictability weakens, center-state relations become more transactional, shifting focus from long-term cooperation to short-term fiscal negotiation. Language and identity tensions also shape federal dynamics. Cultural and linguistic diversity remains a core feature of the Indian Union, and perceived homogenization can generate resistance at the state level. Such tensions often reflect deeper concerns about recognition and autonomy. Federal arrangements become sites where identity-based aspirations seek constitutional expression within the limits of national cohesion. Administrative and institutional centralization further influences these dynamics. National standards and integrated systems promote uniformity, but may also reduce flexibility for states to adapt policies to local contexts. These fault lines do not indicate a breakdown of federalism. Rather, they highlight its contested and adaptive nature within a large democracy. Federalism continues to mediate competing claims through constitutional processes. Understanding contemporary fault lines is essential for GS Paper 2 analysis. They demonstrate how federalism remains a living framework shaped by ongoing negotiation between central authority and regional diversity. The future of Indian federalism depends on its ability to adapt to changing governance demands while remaining anchored in constitutional principles. Reform discussions increasingly focus on improving processes rather than altering the formal federal structure. Strengthening federal institutions is a recurring theme. Platforms for structured consultation and coordination can enhance trust and reduce friction, allowing center-state interactions to move beyond ad hoc negotiation toward institutionalized dialogue. Predictability in fiscal relations is equally significant. Stable and transparent transfer mechanisms help states plan effectively and reduce uncertainty. Fiscal clarity supports cooperative behavior by lowering the scope for contention over resources. Greater emphasis on consultation can improve policy outcomes. When states participate meaningfully in policy design, implementation becomes smoother, and shared ownership of national objectives is strengthened. Administrative coordination also merits attention. Clearer norms governing intergovernmental engagement can reduce ambiguity and prevent conflicts arising from overlapping authority or discretionary intervention. Dialogue mechanisms gain importance in a politically diverse federation. Regular communication helps manage differences, especially when governments at different levels pursue distinct priorities within the same constitutional space. Reform-oriented thinking also recognizes the value of flexibility. Allowing room for context-sensitive solutions can accommodate regional diversity without weakening national coherence. Without weakening national coherence. These approaches do not seek to dilute central authority or expand state power unconditionally. Rather, they emphasize balance, mutual respect, and procedural fairness as foundations of a resilient federal system. Within a GS Paper 2 perspective, the future of Indian federalism lies in refining governance practices. Sustained cooperation, institutional trust, and predictable arrangements can enable federalism to function as an enduring democratic framework. Indian federalism emerges not as a settled arrangement, but as an ongoing process. The Constitution provides a framework, yet its meaning is shaped daily through interaction, negotiation, and adjustment between the center and the states. The constitutional intent combined unity with accommodation. A strong center was designed alongside regional governance, not in opposition to it. This balance was meant to evolve with political, social, and economic change. In practice, federalism is experienced through institutions, fiscal flows, administrative coordination, and political behavior. These lived interactions often stretch constitutional boundaries without breaking them, revealing federalism as adaptive rather than static. Tensions, debates, and disagreements are not departures from federalism. They are indicators of a working system where multiple authorities seek space within a shared constitutional order. Understanding federalism, therefore, requires moving beyond formal provisions. It demands attention to how power is exercised, restrained, and negotiated in everyday governance. The Indian experience suggests that federalism is neither purely cooperative nor purely competitive. It is shaped by context, trust, and institutional practice at any given moment. As governance challenges evolve, so will center-state relations. The constitutional structure remains, but its operation continues to be rewritten through practice. Federalism, in this sense, remains unfinished, defined not by closure, but by continuity.